I want to share with y'all. On Sunday, we're going to have a zine making party thing, and you can sign up with Kathleen and Molly at the back of that. It'll be really fun. It's at 5 p.m., and you give them your information, and then they'll give you the location. I haven't determined it yet. Thursday of next week, the 23rd, we're going to have a safe zone training, so we would really love for all of you to come and get trained to be able to help out all of our queer students on campus. It will be from 5 to 8 p.m. in the Anderson Society room, which is right down the hall, and we will have snacks for you there. So there's a sign-up sheet in the back for that too. We're going to be moving our tablings to Mondays to open up more time for you all to help us out, because that's where we found that y'all are most available. It'll be at the same times from 11 until 2. If you want to help us out with that, you can sign up with Kathleen in the back as well. We're going to be, the last two tablings this month will be focused on domestic violence awareness, and we already hunger/poverty awareness. And then the next couple of weeks after that, we have a feminist film feature on November the 4th, and that one is to be determined. We'll send that to you in our newsletter when we have it. And the day after that, of course, is our general assembly meeting and steering committee meeting. So we'd love for y'all to come to that. So that's enough of the busy work. We'll just dive in. So I'll introduce our speaker, Dr. Purvis from Gender and Race Studies, my department. And Dr. Garvey from Education. Samaria Johnson is president of AASRJ. This is the Alliance for Sexual and Reproductive Justice. Dr. Purvis is also their advisor. And we also have Gafnea of Outlaw, and that's a law student group. And Ben Ray is our wonderful event planner and moderator, and we'll take it from
We came up with this here in the celebration of LGBT History Month, which is this month of October. And so we're very excited to put this on, and we're very appreciative to our panelists. And I'm going to stress that this is a forum, so if you have questions, if you want to contribute to the discussion, I very strongly encourage you to do so, because it's going to be very important in the progress of this event to have as much input from you all, the audience, as humanly possible. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question. And I have given our speakers a list of questions that I came up with that kind of steer discussion, and I'll just ask it, and then we can everything else whoever feels like answering or offering up some answer. Feel free to go ahead. How do gender, sexual, and political identities, as they are all intertwined, affect the relationships between Americans and federal government? It's a broad question.
I can just start by saying the federal level, as far as courts and legislation, are really important, especially because it's really hard to get things passed in the state level courts having to do with anything gender related, anything sexual orientation related, just anything having to do with the LGBT community. So it's really important in that sense, because the federal government has reach over all the states. I mean, I know y'all probably already know that the only reason that, like, Alabama sodomy laws are not still enforced is because of Lawrence v. Texas, a Supreme Court case. So that it's important in that sense.
I'm a survey methodologist by training, and a lot of my advocacy focuses on representation in demographic survey collection. Does anyone remember when you were incoming as a student or faculty or staff, were you asked about your sexual identity, or if you identify in the trans spectrum, what your gender identity is? Does anyone remember that in admissions or alumni relations or faculty forums? The answer is probably no. And this mirrors a lot of federal and state practices with information collection, most notably the census. And so if we put these pieces together, we are basically rendering queer and trans spectrum people invisible, because we have no way of tracking their experiences in a sheer number sense, which consequently, in my area of focus, in higher education, leads to inadequate services and policies that don't affirm people. So we're caught in a catch-22. We don't know how many queer people there are, or the diversity of sexual identities on campus, and therefore we don't provide services for them. We don't provide services for them, which consequently we don't know who's coming into our I think that mirrors a lot of the federal concerns as well.
I would like to put on this that there is a lot of effect between how people interact with their government and the identities that they identify with themselves. So these sexual, gender, and political identities all affect our engagement, how comfortable we feel with being a participant in our government, how empowered we feel by our government. Do they identify us? Do they recognize us as human beings? Do they see us as entities, as groups, as interests? Are they concerned with what we're concerned about? And I think these identities play to that, because if we are feeling invisible, we feel that the government sees us as invisible. We are disenfranchised by that, and we don't participate as much.
Yeah, I think there's a level of trust, different levels of trust that different persons within the queer community feel and have toward the federal government. And so my relationship as a queer Black woman is going to be vastly different than someone who is trans or non-binary identified in terms of gender, or who's straight, white, cisgender male. And so for me, I have in some way the benefit of class privilege, where I feel like I have a cushion that I can fall back on if push comes to shove. And so I feel like if I wanted to, I could go out and march in the streets, perhaps get arrested for protesting, and Daddy's going to come bail me out of jail before the night's out. But at the same time, I might not make it to the jail cell. Being Black, I might get shot on the street immediately. And there comes a point where I feel like either I become apathetic wholly, believing that no matter what I do as a queer person, the government's not going to care. And on the other hand, just an unending anger, where I feel like the system, instead of not working for me, it's working exactly how it's supposed to for me in terms of disenfranchising. And so I think that's something that, I guess when we're talking about relationships between people and the government and how identity affects that, that's something we really need to understand and challenge and work through.
When I first saw the questions, I thought about don't ask, don't tell, and I think I might show that video actually, because it's less than 2 minutes, but anyway. The relationship between people who have non-normative gender, sexual, or political identities with religion is obviously a contentious one, right? Except if you're a cisgender, maybe, normative gay, like HRC kind of gay. We're a place at the table on the hill, I can say. But obviously this is a contentious relationship, and the message is, you're not American, you're not good enough. So if you remember that policy, don't ask, don't tell, obviously it's recently overturned. There's this funny Onion skit where this general comes out and says the reason we don't have gays in the military is they're just too important, And it's really funny. It's just a couple minutes long, but it's the humor is based on how not true it is. So I think that's perfect. So.
With military recruitment down and the need for soldiers greater than ever, some say it's time for the military to change its policy of barring homosexuals from enlistment. Joining us today from the Pentagon is General Robert Dubray. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure, Brandon.
General, the military has been easing restrictions on enlistment in almost every area, on criminals, older veterans, even those with serious medical conditions. But why not gays?
Gay people are different, Brandon. Under no circumstances can we put America's homosexuals in danger.
But the homosexuals themselves are demanding the right to serve their country at a time of war.
Gays of America are the only group left untouched by war. Special, pure, rare, like a gleaming diamond or a snow-white colt. We must protect them.
Has this always been the goal?
It has been the solemn oath of every man in uniform to lay down his life in defense of America. 7.
General, policy, which many see as discriminatory.
The reason we instituted that policy was because we knew we would never be able to keep out all the cases. To know that any of them managed to enlist and put themselves in harm's way would break our hearts. All of them commanders. We love them too much.
So you're saying that the military's entire purpose is to fight so that homosexuals don't have to?
Nor should their fragile psyches be subjected to the horrible sights that occur on the battlefield. Their pure minds should be reserved for thoughts of man on man or woman on woman romance.
Well, thank you for clarifying this very sensitive issue for our viewers, General McBride.
My pleasure. God bless America and her babies.
So the humor is obviously based on the fact that heterosexuality and, you know, masculine based on that heteronormativity class. You know, heterosexuality is considered patriotic. We have a healthy hetero individual who engages in healthy heterosexual sex with their partner, monogamously, of course, in the context of marriage, hopefully with procreation involved, and then that, you know, healthy heterosexual family makes up a healthy hetero nation. And during the Cold War period, this was actually like a thing that was, you know, promoted, that was promoted, fighting off communism, you know, healthy heterosexual patriotism. So this is obviously reverse world, and that's obviously where the humor comes from. But the message is, if you are different, if you are non-normative, either sexually, gender-wise, you know, or in terms of your political affinities, then you're not American, or you're not good enough to serve your country, to X, Y, get married, X, Y, Z, right? So anyway.
Does anybody in the audience have anything to add to this, or any questions they would like to ask before we move on? Okay, so I came up with another question. I have 10 questions here, just so everyone is aware of that. Our second question, in kind of keeping with the first, in thinking about policy and policy making, how might we ensure that our representatives are truly concerned with inclusion and diversity?
We want to keep that order, or mix it up?
I think we should mix it up.
Yeah.
I don't want to put the pressure into it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there's the cliche back to basics example where, you know, we can elect people that actually reflect the population. But that presupposes that people believe in government enough, that merely being elected and going on the Hill, or staying in state, is enough to affect change. And so there's making laws and then there's enforcing them. And I guess that would also require an honest assessment of who and what policy is for. And so as I see it now, it's just the maintenance of the status quo with a few half-hearted concessions. And so it's the idea that, oh, once we achieve nationwide marriage equality, everything will be hunky-dory, and that'll be that. Thanks, guys. No, you've done good work. But we're not confronting the problem of rampant homelessness. We're not talking about homophobic sex education curriculum, if you even get a real sex ed in the first place. We're not talking about, you know, violence against queer persons, especially trans women, on the street. We're not talking about Alabama's right to work law that, you know, allows employers to discriminate you against you or fire you just because you're not straight, cisgender conforming. And so I think that, just let it go. That's it.
So I immediately thought of inclusive and how important dialogue is and how important it is to show up, like at town hall meetings and this kind of thing. I went to a town hall meeting in Atlanta about an inclusive ENDA, so the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, you know, that doesn't have, is inclusive of gender. And so, you know, and then when that doesn't work, of course, there's direct action, there's lobbying, campaigns, like I'm going to probably later talk about songs, Homo Sweet Homo campaign. But yeah, I mean, ENDA is an important step in that direction, and just, you know, lobbying, agitating for policy change, showing up, and part of the dialogue, even forums like this, I think are important for opening up questions and helping see see alliances and work and collaborate and so on.
The biggest thing that I see is that, and this is kind of an issue that's with like voting population in general, or just general citizens, is that we're allowing elected or officials trying to get elected to just say things and say, you know, I support this, you know, I'm going to do this, and then nobody checks up on them. I mean, I think especially in like Alabama, where it's easy to say you know, I love everybody, and yet when it comes time for the vote, oh, I'm going to vote for that. You know, look at what they've done. You know, like right now, I think we have 2 elected officials, Alvin Holmes and Patricia Todd, that like, they're not only saying I support your community, but they're actually doing things. They're proposing bills. You know, so just check up on the things that they're doing. Do your homework and make them keep their promises. So.
It can be so discouraging sometimes, can it? It's just tiring work. Philosophically, I might say that we value intersectionality and the complexity of ourselves. But in politics, we have to have this grand narrative as an LGBTQ community that whitewashes and makes everything homonormative, and it puts people on the fringe. So I don't know what to do as an advocate. If I'm supposed to lean into my white privilege to advocate for people who don't have a place at the table, or if I'm supposed to come in strong with an intersectional lens, unabashedly saying, racism affects everybody, homophobia affects everybody, and if we can all approach political advocacy from an intersectional lens, we might not be disparate in numbers across different social movements. But that's not how American politics works right now. So it's discouraging.
Yes, so a lot of y'all talk about like actual women advocacy and lobbying and stuff. So how do we as like student leaders or just as students like engage our fellow students and like just fellow citizens in a way that makes them get involved? Because something that I have felt is that there's like a lack of willingness from especially progressives or even like complacent people on campus to like really mobilize and get stuff done. So how do we reach out to people in a way that makes them maybe even like feel obligated, like if not personally because I don't have like a friend or something, or more all affected by the patriarchy obviously. So like how do we connect these people like in a way that makes them want to go out with us and lobby or, you know, stage a protest or something?
Student apathy is so difficult. It's really tough, especially because it becomes tiring work when you're here continually. Now, I may be coming from a place of higher ed scholarship, but I think it underscores the narrow-mindedness of our curriculum and required components of the undergraduate and graduate student experience. And I think that to enact change, we should focus our advocacy on administrators and putting pressure on them to enact different policy rather than, in addition to, I should say, mobilizing and creating a social mass of students.
I think as a student organizer, as a student activist, there always has to be the one who goes first. And so a lot of what I've noticed among students, among young people in general, is just a general fear that if you mess up now, it's never going to work out for you later. And so, for instance, my dad's always told me, Samaria, do not put that on Facebook, you're not going to get a job. And I think especially in this economy, that's a legitimate fear that we all have. So if I plaster my face and my name all over the internet, all over campus, and I stand for this shouldn't be controversial, but controversial issue, then I'm setting myself up for 50, 60, 70 years of hardship when I don't have to. So even if I support this thing, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to show up, I'm not going to show out because that'll affect me negatively down the road. And so for us, there's that fear where I don't want to be the first one, but if not me, then nobody else is going to feel comfortable coming out too. And I think there should be small things. So hey, just sign this petition. That's all we need. Hey, just turn up for this event. You don't have to hold a sign, but just you being the face in the crowd matters. And then there can be larger things where people show up in Dr. Bonner's office and they're like, hey, I'm not going to do anything until I get about this issue. And so offering the opportunity for different people to participate in different ways that are concrete, that mean something, but have different levels of risk, that matters a lot. And there are people who want to join in who tell you, this is how I want to, this is what I don't feel comfortable with, but this is what I can do, and I'm willing to do it. And really letting them, honestly, that helps a lot.
I think we're doing a great job with social media and getting the word out about the UA Feminist Caucus, and you're doing a brilliant job. But I agree that you as students sometimes don't recognize the power that you have in dealing with administrators. It's the students who get the policies changed. We can talk in faculty senate all day long about best practices and changing policies and have task forces and make suggestions. I mean, the faculty senate really just makes recommendations to the administration. They don't have to follow anything. But students, unfortunately, are considered customers or paying customers. You have the power to make these changes, make demands, and to demands more inclusive, non-discrimination policies and the like. And I think that sometimes students don't recognize the power that they do have.
There's certain vehicles that have more power, like media, and having a national focus on inequity on campus. And there are strategic ways of playing the political system on campus where you won't be ostracized, but you'll be welcomed at the table because you're a change agent and you spin it in a positive, action-oriented way. Or at least that's what I hope. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm going back here.
Okay, we're going to move on from that question unless anyone in the audience has something to add or any questions they would like to ask. Okay. My next question that I came up with was, and this is where we're going to start talking about marriage equality specifically, so be sure to participate in this section. In what ways does our panel think that the marriage equality movement, we'll put that in quotes, is beneficial to LGBTQ plus groups? And in what ways do you think that it might be detrimental to them?
Yeah.
I think equal rights, of course, but I think that a lot of times, so LGBTQ justice gets reduced to LG movement politics, and in some ways has lost its radical vision. I think it's great that there's more representation and attention to rights, and people feel like they can be normative citizens and so on. But people like Amber Halva, and Michael Warner talk about, some of that loss of the radical vision. Back in the day, anyone who was gay was, part of a whole host of queers, and now there's a split between lesbian and gay and queers, and we have to be careful about who gets left out of that. I mean, anyone who's not part of a couple-centric society, and then those who are just always going to be on the fringes, homeless, infected, fat, people with disabilities, etc., people who are always going to be on the margins. And so it's important, I think, to clear those spaces and to not have a single issue movement. That's, but of course, like the baseline of that is, of course, equal rights, of course, representation, but can we think beyond this as well?
There was a
Yeah, we live in capitalism, and so I think if marriage equality happens, don't you think there are a lot of expensive wedding companies that would just profit off of, oh, we do gay weddings, so you're going to spend.
Definitely that marriage industrial complex.
Yeah.
The wedding industrial complex. Yes, and there's a whole book about that by Chris Baker. Although might have marriages.
Part of the complexity of my queer identity is celebrating the spectrum of relationships and identities. And I think people have a space to be in what I would call a homonormative relationship, monogamous marriage. And as an advocate, I want people to find happiness in that way. I think of, so I'm a student. affairs scholar, so I think of student services a lot. And I think of, like, for example, a university checking a box if they have a black student union and they think it's a warm climate now for black students. And I feel like it's similar with marriage equality. So we have so-called progressive politicians who are advocating for marriage equality and marriage reform, who will check that LGBT box and then move on from our community. And so, do we follow the tide and allow that to happen? Or do we push against it, risking a forward movement so we might become stagnant and ostracized again? I'm not sure.
So, again, like they've been talking about, I think you're going to see a lot of issues show up within, the gay marriage side as much as you see in the straight marriage side. I'm getting closer to my 30s, and I'm seeing a lot of even straight couples that are like, oh yeah, we're going to get married, we're going to get the white picket fence, and we're just going to be perfect. And I'm like, yeah, in 2 years you're going to be getting divorced and realize that you're not that perfect couple. I think it's going to be the same in the gay community. It's going to be like, oh, we can fit this perfect little mold. If we can just get married, I'll be the woman, you be the man, or you can be the man and I'll be the woman, and we're just going to be perfect. And it's not going to end up that way. So in a way, I think it is giving a sense of false hope, in that we have this certificate, so now we're just the same. But I also think on the pro side, that getting a court, especially the Supreme Court, to say, okay, we've given all these other groups, this protected status, I would love to see the Supreme Court finally take, this community from being rational basis, which means, the legislation always wins, basically, to a heightened status to say, no, it is discriminatory to discriminate, to make a law against this community. And that protection would have so far-reaching. Like with Romer, it dealt with the same issues, but it was basically, a different kind of law. And so I think that to get a court to admit to that and say, look, this is ridiculous, would be actually very valuable. And you can look at some of the lower court decisions at the federal, and some of them are actually bringing it up to a heightened scrutiny, but then others are just using that rational basis for the light thing. But don't get me started.
Well, this is just a very interesting topic for me. Like, I like to joke and say I've only been queer for a year. That's not true. I've been queer my whole life. I just have become aware of it in the past year. And being queer, being a part of the queer community as a member, not as an ally, has really helped me work through marriage as an institution itself and really focus on what marriage means, like itself and within the larger scope of our culture. And I think that the marriage equality movement is missing a huge opportunity to challenge marriage as a thing. And so we treat marriage in this society as an aspiration. We treat it as a cornerstone. We believe, regardless of where we fall along the political spectrum, that without marriage, society as a whole will crumble down. And a very liberal or neoliberal argument for marriage equality is that by including queer couples in this, then we are strengthening it as a whole. And I just kind of ask, well, why does it need to be strengthened? And I think one of the best parts of the queer community is the diversity of different relationships and how we organize those things and the way we relate to each other. And so you have your very monogamous, long-term, we're in it to win couples, and that's great. But then you also have people who are polyamorous, perhaps, or they're like, I don't believe in marriage, I don't necessarily believe in long-term. If we end up long-term, that's great. If we don't, then we'll work on that when we get to it. And so instead of feeling like marriage is a goal, and thinking about, well, how come makes you better inherently as a couple than you are as a single that you should get, you know, financial benefits for it? How come, like, a married couple is considered more legitimate, you know, as parents than a single person or an unmarried couple? How come, you know, I have 2 or 3 partners and we're all each other's partners? How come, you know, suddenly, you know, that's unacceptable, that's inappropriate, that's not child friendly? And so instead of really taking on those challenges, we're like, oh no, we need to get married the way not queer people do. And that's the right way to get married. And we don't really take that on. And I think that's just a very interesting way of looking at it.
Ben and I have talked a little bit in the past couple of days about marriage equality and stuff. And so would any of y'all agree, and maybe elaborate as to why, that the mainstream marriage equality movement has limited the queer liberation movement, or
how have normalized movements such as the marriage equality movement affected queer liberation? Are there any opinions on that?
I mean, one small example is we still function under gender binary for marriage. So what does that mean for gender fluidity in this structured gendered system? It's so complex.
I mean, I'm seeing a flow that's very typical of all basically minority groups. I mean, first you see an assimilation of the most the groups that are seen as most normal in a sense, and then as time goes on, then it becomes more inclusive of outlier groups. You know, you see it a lot with racially minority groups. You know, it's like, okay, I can like you because you're the most like me, but they're too different. I don't like them. I mean, if you go through history and just look, it's the same. So I think as time goes on, you'll see more acceptance as maybe society becomes a little bit more progressive.
On the Cassie's question, there's a lot of fascinating elements to this topic. It's so happening. Like, I try to teach this topic in my class last Thursday. I keep redoing my notes every day because things are happening. Just highly going in a good way. But so one sort of maybe hopeful or maybe counterpoint to the question you asked about a sort of mainstream movement and kind of a liberation or radical movement is what we've all witnessed happening in Alabama and Deep South, where I think it's, I'm from the Northeast, so I have had a lovely learning curve on what the Deep South is and can be and can achieve in its own unique ways. But I'm interested to watch the movements that start, the groups on the ground here who have made some of these initial inroads. So Song being one, Campaign for Southern Equality, there's a host of other sort of small grassroots groups. And now we see the national movement noticing us, right? So and I have to throw a shout out, the Spectrum is doing a marriage, moving beyond marriage panel next week, taking on this question directly, and the HRC field rep will be there, so we can ask actually yourself of kind of how that dynamic is unfolded, where there's now a $7 million budget coming to the use out of, and there's a pushback, they're coming to save us kind of annoyance, I think, to the HRC simply noticing. But then again, they noticed because of so much work that was done on the ground here from, I don't know that it was liberation groups, but very grassroots justice groups, and groups working in unexpected places and doing things that I would hesitate to put in a normative, limiting, exclusionary category. Marriage is a conservative thing. We brought this up in class on Thursday. This whole brouhaha, a very conservative thing. But still, the way that you get at that, or the way the movement builds things, I think is really fascinating. Watching states like Idaho, Kansas, Oklahoma, coming out of there, the first couples getting married in those states were not the slick, big biceps, V-neck, driving off in a Mercedes to the beach house that we saw in California, New York, and maybe Boston and all that. So I don't know that that's totally hopeful and over, but it's interesting. It's been a lot to keep up with, I think, as it's been unraveling and unfolding.
Are there any other questions or comments? So we'll move on to another question. Okay. This is kind of playing off what everyone was talking about. This normalized both, and how they compete and how they work together. And so this question, I think, will address how we might rally against some of the problems that we have with normalized movements, such as the marriage equality movement, that in some places is not as normalized as we might like to think it is. But the question is, what are the effects of appealing to mainstream ideas of acceptability for LGBTQ plus groups, and how might these groups rally against such normalization? So in effect, if we are feeling this normalization, if we are really seeing it, how might we organize to rally against it?
Well, to answer the first half of that question, it's the idea that you can exclude via inclusion, which is kind of paradoxical, but the idea that if you accept more people into the idea of acceptability, that makes it easier to exclude other people who don't fit into that idea. So, I'm thinking of actually how the Irish became like in terms of race, but for the queer community, if a queer person doesn't fit into this or rejects the right way of being queer, then it's their fault, and that they deserve the violence, the stigma, the discrimination that comes their way. And marriage is a very easy way. So if I, as a queer person, if I decide that marriage isn't for me and my partner, even though chances are I'll end up living in a state where, you know, marriage is an option for us, then I don't deserve to be treated with respect by my employer in terms of partnership benefits. I don't, like, if we go to an adoption agency, then, you know, we don't deserve to be parents because we haven't made, you know, the right commitment to each other. My family might decide, hey, you know, your partner, you guys aren't really a couple because you aren't married, and you haven't proven to the family that you two are an item, for better or for worse. And I think on that same note, we're leaving people out who aren't queer and acceptable or the most visible of ways. And so when people see me walking around campus, they're not going to be like, yeah, that girl's definitely into women. You know, I don't look it. And so that's a very easy way to erase my identity as someone who's bi. That's a very easy way to exclude me from the conversation, from dialogues, both on campus, locally in Alabama, and on the national scale, because I don't fit in. And that has ramifications, like both social, political, and culturally. So, and I think the presence and diversity of the queer community, going to the second half, is a kind of rally on its own. And so instead of like the poster child being this cis white gay man, like how, like, especially since the majority of the community is POC and the majority of the community is polysexual in some way, really hammering home, like, hey, no, queerness exists in, I guess, the most unexpected of places. And the South is a really good example of that. Really conservative areas in general, a really good example of that.
Creating a binary of queer and normative feels very unqueer, though. So by talking about not being queer enough or not fluid enough in your gender expression creates a whole nother binary of exclusion based on normativity. So it's difficult to talk about the continuum of identities and activism while wanting to move away from normativity. I struggle with this as a cis white gay man because I try to embrace the complexity of who I am, but I'm essentialized with my normativity. And I want to enter a space of fluidity and queerness. It's difficult sometimes to enter that space if I'm not presenting that way. So I feel like Ben's question said something along the lines, can you repeat your question one more time?
The question, yes. What are the effects of appealing to mainstream ideas of acceptability for LGBTQ groups, how might these groups rally against?
Okay, so the rally against really triggered me. I don't want to rally against these people. I want to create a broader coalition. So how can we create more unity across normativity and queerness through our shared experience of marginalization? I might argue to say, no matter how normative a cis gay white man might be, if someone sees him as queer in some context. And are we allowing space within the queer spectrum for someone who's struggling with that?
So, the effect of basically going along with this, and I would say it's almost like a foot in the door philosophy that these more mainstream groups take, and it's the effect of going along with it is that you can possibly be more effective in getting things done, and that's the hard truth is that a lot of times these groups have to basically wrap up a little package and basically sell it to people who would rather just them go away. You know, and so a lot of times that's the necessary truth that they have to face in order to get something done. You know, if you want to get your foot in the door, you have to get them to at least open the door. So I think it sucks. I mean, it sucks. And I was just talking to a law professor today, and he asked me, he was like, do you think that they would have passed the Civil Rights Act with Title VII if they had thought in their mind that sex was going to include like gender identity, sexual orientation? And I went, no, I don't. I really don't think it would have passed if they thought it was anything other than, you know, just a basic binary. And if you want to get even more brass tacks, women who were being sexually harassed in the law place. They didn't even want it to include men. It was like, you know, like a male situation. And so I think that's basically what these groups are having to face. And then I think once the foot is in the door, so to speak, that is the time when you actually like put a stake in the ground. Is when that's when you start branching out. I think, and that's just following that philosophy. I totally get the whole community's desire to reject that and say no, that's wrong, because in a moral sense it is. But I think that is the method that's basically being taken by these groups, and I mean and there are pros and cons to it.
In the same token, I think it's really important to not just accept crumbs and to fight for more, and to also see LGBTQ politics as embracing that Q opened it up for a lot of queer-minded straight people as well with queer politics, who want to break those binaries of sex and gender and all the rest of those limiting binaries. And I think it's really important to, you know, question the politics of respectability. At the same time that we fight for certain rights, and to remember the dead, and to also show up and show your face. And so maybe this is a good time to just mention this campaign that Song is doing. So Southerners on New Ground Song is this very queer grassroots LGBTQ justice group, and in response to what happened in South Carolina last spring, where and Gary Smith was the loudest voice in that. But Gary Smith and the Ways and Means Committee of South Carolina State Legislature decided to instigate budget cuts to public schools, public universities in South Carolina, and they targeted USC Upstate and College of Charleston for assigning LGBTQ-themed books in College of Charleston's comic book experience. They assigned Alison Bechdel's book about a graphic novel about her relationship with her father but they assigned at College of Charleston a common book experience fun home, and then the legislature said that that program and then any LGBTQ themed events, and they charted at USC Upstate, they're having a Bodies of Knowledge symposium. There was a speaker who was giving a very funny, tongue-in-cheek title of the presentation, was something like how to be a lesbian or something silly. But because they were LGBTQ themed events or programs, they voted 20-1 to slash the budget of those schools by the exact amount that those programs cost. And my friend, who is the Women's and Gender Studies Director at USC Upstate, lost her center because of those budget cuts. So what SOM did in response is this Homo Sweet Home campaign, and so there's this, that's the homepage for it. They basically stood up to the legislature and confronted the attacks on the LGBTQ community or crypto or people who were allies by these conservative South Carolina state representatives. So they brought politics, art, culture, and technology together by doing this campaign where they basically said, it's our home, we'll fight back against these attacks in South Carolina and across the South. And so the way they fought back is by battling this erasure. And so this is just a little piece on it as one example of the photographs that they did. But what they did was they took selfies, or not all selfies, but they just started holding up signs saying basically, I'm here, I'm queer, no more legislated homophobia, I'm a resident of South Carolina, and I support, LGBTQ content in the schools, or, I'm not seeing a lot of the photos, but cut the cuts, I came from South Carolina, I made of rust and blood, stories and memories, I'm in love with the swamps, etc. Shame on you, basically a lot of people held up signs saying, shame on you, Garrett Smith, shame on South Carolina, and basically showed up and they were identifying themselves as, I guess, just looking, there were a lot of pictures. I'm here, I'm trans, I'm queer, I'm a proud mom of a queer kid. Someone says we love each other, obviously an intergenerational relationship. Welcome to the queer South. Anyway, so basically showing up saying, here's this person, I'm an ally, I'm an alumna, I won't accept your fear, ignorance, and censorship, shame on you. And so basically people just held up signs and announced themselves as a presence. So the whole we are here, we are queer, we're allies, we're supporters, we're part of this broad spectrum of people, I think is really important. And again, politics, art, culture, technology, all coming together, it's really important. The song's amazing. You know anything, the song should find out, because they're in Alabama now, they weren't for a while. They're mostly in Birmingham, but you get involved.
Are there any questions or comments from you all on this? Because I feel like this is a very nice way to segue between this question, which is really aimed at how we not rally, as Dr. Garvey might have suggested, about rally against people who are normative or perform that way, but rather the process of normalization, process by which queer people have had to become normal to appear acceptable. And so moving to another question, and this goes into the future some. In the inevitable event, as it seems to be now, of marriage equality, what happens? What do we do? Where are we going to be going, and what will the focus of the program be after we achieve this goal that has been so prominent in our communities? Please keep going.
I think it just opens things up. I would like to address metrocentrism, right? Saying, like, if you're queer, you have to get to a city, go to your little enclave, like, get out of the South, and like Homo Sweet Homo, just stand your ground, be where you want to be, and just, not feel like, oh, if you're harassed, stigmatized, shamed, exterminated, you deserved it if you're a Brantina in Nebraska, or you're and so I think that the metrocentrism is something that we don't pay enough attention to, and anyway, that's just, I mean, there's so many other issues, battles, educational opportunities, like a real robust notion of sexual justice and really fighting comprehensive, safe, accurate, age-appropriate sex education at every level of school.
Well, I do think, like I've mentioned before, that marriage isn't really going to change. I think that's a status quo that is going to take a very, very long time to really challenge, honestly. And so I think as far as marriage equality goes, other than the part where people will be able to marry generally whoever they want to, regardless of sex or gender, it's going to look exactly like it looks now. And I think, and this is kind of a bit doom and gloom for that, I'm sorry, that unless, especially the heavy hitter energy, that attention, and most importantly, that money into other very pressing issues in the queer communities, so housing, employment, education, sexual and reproductive justice, really immigration is a big one that we don't really think about. Really hammer home the part where the queer community isn't just about who can marry who, then essentially we're going to go back to square one. And so this is a really good opportunity, and I'm thinking of the HRC specifically, for, move headquarters to somewhere unexpected, so Alabama maybe, or Kansas. Pour money into Hollywood so that we're producing, mainstream films and TV shows that actually represent, that actually hit home about different queer experiences. And I use queer experiences plural on purpose. Really talk about, what we're doing in terms of sexual justice and, what the adoption industry looks like, things like that. And there's every opportunity for it. It's because once marriage equality goes, there's essentially a vacuum in the mainstream consciousness where the queer community can fill up as they see fit. But there's the danger of feeling, so accomplished that we don't have to do anything else, that's all that we could do, and that's all that we needed to do, and so pretty much forget that, there are other things to worry about.
See, I feel like marriage equality basically was like, I feel like it was the stepping stone. I feel like it was the easy kind of pace to take, only because the precedent was already there with loving. I feel like a lot of people looked at loving and thought, wow, we could actually make the same argument, And so I think that was like why it took, and plus it really cut at the heart of traditional, your traditional, conservative type of citizens, community, basically the thought, I think it really just got into the roots of that thinking. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it did take such main stage for so long. Meanwhile, there are so many other, more everyday type of issues, less symbolic, less, image-wise, just practical type of laws that could have been pursued. Like, for instance, say you have this couple, they go get married on Saturday, or, whatever. And Monday they go into work, they go, yay, I got married, and then they get fired immediately in Alabama. Totally legal. Totally legal. Or they walk out on the street, yay, we're married, and then they get bashed. Is there a hate crime for it? No, there's really not. And I think it's still half of the country, it's still totally legal to fire someone for sexual orientation. And so I think I feel like favorable rulings for marriage equality are tools. You take the precedent, you take the law, and you use that for tools for other things that totally need to be addressed. I mean, it's getting ridiculous now with INTA trying to get it passed. And now with Hobby Lobby, there's completely new implications. I mean, a corporation not only is a person, but it can now have a religion. But so what kind of implications are that? I mean, I'm sorry, but that opinion scared the crap out of me. And so, I mean, we're going to have to deal with that. You know, at what point does religion become where, you know, you can fire someone because they're gay? You know, I know they addressed it in the opinion, but they left the door so wide open. So I don't think, I agree that I think marriage, this antiquated notion of marriage, as well, and then trying to, you know, make it as, you know, malleable to where, you know, yay, we can have other groups get married now. I think it's more symbolic. I think there's more practical, on the ground things that could be approached now that could have real effect on people's lives.
I'm not a policy wonk, so I don't have like an issue, a platform issue, but I'm just so eager to see coalition building in an intersectional way. Like, what would it be for progressives across all different identity-based communities to tackle immigration or the prison industrial complex in like a large mass? And HRC is useful for a couple of things: fundraising, political power, bringing people to things. So if they brought that power to an issue that is more complex than within the LGBT community, it'd be pretty cool to see. But I don't know if I see that modeled in any progressive movement, so I don't really know what that looks like though.
I ask about, from the panel and from you all as well, is there a perception of mobility after we, and I say we collectively, get marriage equality? Is there, will we be able to mobilize resources to go into different areas, like the industrial complex, or address these things as LGBT issues, now that, and socially speaking, will be seen as being very equal now? Within this, the implication of marriage equality is that now we have, society has dawned upon us collectively an equality that we did not have before. And so, will it be reasonable for us to ask anything else? And I wanted to get some opinions of what you all thought of that.
Well, it's a really interesting question because I think it'll go the way that the feminist movement has gone, in the sense where people are like, oh, well, you guys aren't being anymore, this is post-feminism, you know, like, you guys got your Roe v. Wade, you got, you know, you can work outside the home now, what else could you possibly want? And yet, it's like, no, you know, speaking of the prison industrial complex, like, hey, you know, the feminist movement has made that an issue because of the lack of healthcare, lack of quality healthcare in prisons, the use of child protection laws to throw in victims of domestic violence in jail for not protecting their children adequately, for not fulfilling your duties as a mother. That's a reproductive justice issue. Really hammering home on another front, the push for minimum wage that equals a living wage again. And so really talking about, hey, the people who are overwhelmingly represented among minimum wage workers are women, are non-binary people, who are transgender, are people of color. So framing issues that are seemingly unrelated and bringing that all back to sexual reproductive justice / feminism. And I think there's every opportunity for the queer community to do that too. So if we're talking about the prison industrial complex, saying, hey, how are transgender individuals treated in the system? Hey, how come like stand your ground doesn't seem like all of a sudden doesn't apply to a trans woman on the street who was attacked via hate crime. and so on and so forth. And I think they're just, all we need to do is just open your minds to the possibilities because it's there. Immigration, you know, if a queer, undocumented immigrant is targeted at a school for being gay, and they need to go to the hospital, all of a sudden they're undocumented. They're not going to go to the hospital because that means, you know, getting kicked out of school, losing their job, being deported. And what does that mean for their family? And so that's immigration and figuring out ways in which identities intersect, and where queer people are, and using that as a way not only to improve the lives of people within the queer community, but push a greater social agenda that looks toward justice and liberation as a way to build a better society.
Do you think we should create a social agenda that collectively tackles one issue? Or do you think it's to our benefit to approach societal inequities across the gamut?
I don't see why we couldn't do both. And I think, you know, there are some people who make one cause their mission for life, and that's cool. And there are other people who are more jack of all trades. And I don't think, as it appears now, even though it's not necessarily the case, that the queer community is all about, you know, marriage equality, that doesn't need to happen again. And, you know, people have different strengths. They have different identities within themselves that they want to give emphasis to over others at any given time. And that's something they can do too. And it doesn't mean that they're sacrificing something else.
It's something I'm battling with myself, because I don't know if I should find a platform and unidimensionally advocate for that in my work as a social justice ally, or if it seems normative to say we should collectively tackle something across identity-based communities, because as evidenced by marriage equality,